this came out this morning, an article about them having a look at the available rental properties that were listed for lease or rent over the weekend, or over the last period, that the number of properties that were affordable for certain classes of worker were remarkably unaffordable. So they looked at it, Anglicare Sydney. So, okay, they're going to have a focus on social welfare. So they're going to be talking more about low-income earners and therefore the unique concerns and problems that they will have. And obviously talking about, well, the risk is if you can't live near where you work, you're then going to be pushed out to fringe suburbs, you're going to have longer commutes, your overall quality of life is going to go down. Okay, it was March, not current. Okay, so they looked at the New South Wales property market on a single weekend in March. 17,000 listings, and then classed how affordable they were for a worker to spend no more than a third of their income on housing, which is the basic rule of thumb that, well, I guess it's sort of breaking down now with $1 million+ basic houses, but it's the basic rule of thumb that's existed forever. And so out of 17,000 listings, they determined that only 500 were suitable for a school, like were affordable for a school teacher, only 200 for an aged care worker. Now, they've since had a pay rise, so they might get a few more. 162 for people working in hospitality, and so on and so forth. The breakdown that they had was looking at, well, not just Sydney, because obviously they're focused on Sydney, but all across the state. You've got, it was like 3/4 of the rental. There's a figure further down in the article, but there you go, right up here. Greater Sydney had most of the rental properties, with 3/4 of them being in the Greater Sydney area, but basically being unaffordable. So out of 3/4 of the available rental properties, only 100 in the Greater Sydney area were considered affordable for school teachers, firefighters in the same bracket, and so on and so forth down the list. Nurses, 45, construction workers, 38. Some of these occupations, you look at it and you go, well, some of them are going to be on a fairly low wage. Early childhood educators tend to be. So in other words, people working in childcare centres tend to be relatively low paid. Hospitality as well tends to be a fairly low paid or low income environment. But you'd think that nurses would have, they're professionals. You'd normally think of them as being middle class, yet they could afford less than half the properties that school teachers can. And same goes for fireys and ambos. You'd expect them to be on a decent salary, maybe not a high middle class salary, but certainly above blue collar worker salary. You'd be lower middle class at least. But the affordability indexes, the affordability is so low. And all right, so Greater Sydney still had 75% of the availability, but even then, for the rest of the state, and there's some pretty decent population centres. So across places like Newcastle, Wollongong, the major regional centres, Bathurst, Wagga, Orange, Tamworth, Grafton, Lismore, did I say Dubbo? Probably Dubbo as well. Coffs Harbour, Gosford, Port Macquarie, no, the other places, Ballina, and then you got all the other centres down south as well. Albury, I say Wagga, and then Griffith, Narrandera, places like that. I mean, places with tens and, well, some of them have hundreds of thousands of people. Some have a million. I mean, Greater Wollongong, I think, is nudging a million. Greater Newcastle and Hunter is also, I think, nudging a million. And so you've got these large population centres that, and even, I guess, in the high tens of thousands, nudging 100 plus thousand for some of the more regional centres. You've got a total of, what, 400 houses across the state outside of Sydney that are considered affordable for school teachers, or 200 affordable for nurses. There's a lot. It's not just the ability of people to afford a house to buy. There's just nothing out there at the moment. I mean, it's a shortage of stock, full stop. Just trying to think. There was an article not long ago, and I can't remember where in Australia it was looking, but the rental vacancy rate was less than 2%. Now, there's a certain... It's like unemployment in a way. The market needs a certain level of vacancy. There needs to be a certain degree of unemployment for the economy to be strong, because it allows for people to move jobs. You need people to come out of one job, a little bit of time as they then search and acquire a new job. There needs to be a bit of a float, because that then means that it's not too strong for employers, it's not too strong for employees. There is the ability to have mobility. If your employment rate skyrockets, it means obviously there's a lot more people looking for work, and it becomes, the incentives then fall on the side of the employer, because they're going to have a lot more people applying for jobs. If the rate is too low, there's not enough people applying for jobs. It puts a brake on economic development and economic growth, because companies and workers can't get the people in that they want or that they need. So there needs to be like a certain amount. Similar sort of thing with the rental market. There needs to be a certain percentage of available properties for people entering the rental market, for people looking to change existing rentals, so from moving from one to another, end of lease, breaking lease, all that sort of stuff. Many reasons why someone moves out of a rental. People going from share houses to their own place, all that sort of stuff. And so there needs to be a certain percentage in the market that is vacant. And as long as that percentage doesn't grow too much, it's considered a healthy figure. It gives enough mobility in the market that if there's too many vacancies, rents are suppressed and people and investors leave the market. If there's not enough vacancies, rents skyrocket, and it prevents renters from being able to move around. And so there's these competing interests the whole time. And as long as you don't end up in a place where there is excessive property vacancies, but none of them can be let, well, why aren't they being leased? Is it because you're asking for too much, or because the market's not there to move in? You're not stuck with too many places that can't be leased. And the short lease versus long lease, i.e. Holiday rental versus normal lease, is complicating things too, because it influences properties that may have normally gone to a longer lease are now chasing higher value with shorter leases, but sitting vacant more often. All those sort of issues. So we want a certain percentage of vacancy. And if those vacancy rates are too low, then we're going to see things like this where affordability crashes through the floor. And for a lot of these people, they may not have readily available alternate living conditions. Now, if you're young and you're single, then shared living arrangements can be viable. But for people with families and things like that, if they're not already living at home with parents or even a multi-generational household, and that has its own issues as well, which isn't necessarily normal for a lot of Australians, then they don't necessarily have the ability to go into share houses or things like that. So there's further pressures on people moving in and out of rentals and stuff, and it's housing insecurity in a way. And it's, yeah, I mean, people living 90 minutes from work in Sydney, I mean, 90 minutes, I don't know that it's a huge distance. But this person, it's interesting. He lives in Paddington, so that's considered more inner city, but commutes to, sorry, he works in Paddington, but lives in Western Sydney. I had it the other way around then for a second. Yeah, I don't think a care manager is ever going to get paid an amount that would allow them to live comfortably in Paddington. Well, I don't know that he lives comfortably in Western Sydney, but he's not going to be able to get paid enough to live close enough to work. Not without significant lifestyle changes or considerations. So yeah, rental apartments near work in Paddington, thousands of dollars. Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, public transport for up to 3 hours a day, it's a cost. It takes almost half a workday on top of your existing work. It comes at a cost. There's a social cost. So, and then you have the same thing of with unemployment rates. If it's too high, people eventually stop looking. Well, renters stop looking as well. So it comes back to affordability, and people talk about affordable housing, not say public housing, but affordable housing. And yeah, I mean, obviously they're focusing mainly on Sydney, but there's the issue, and then there's pushback from low density established suburbs to rezone areas to medium or high density, which will give more housing stock, more housing supply, maybe in the form of apartments or units. But there's pushback on that